20 tips for IELTS speaking, with tips for part 1, part 2 and part 3. No nonsense, no magic, just pure gold. Even if I say so myself. You know, I've seen all sorts of advice on the internet, and a lot of that advice is not helpful. And I think if you follow some of it, it'll help you get a lower score, not a higher score. Things like use these 7 words and you'll get a band 7. Or never say wanna, gonna, or you know, in IELTS speaking. And sometimes I laugh. And sometimes I cry. Because the result is students are confused and frustrated. So that's why I've made this compilation video of 20 reliable and realistic tips that will help you with your IELTS speaking test. No promises, no magic, just pure gold. I mean, solid advice from someone who understands IELTS speaking. So why listen to me? Well, it's a good question. Thank you for asking. I focus on IELTS speaking skills like no other teacher. I've worked in international education for over 20 years, and I've just checked. I have over 40,000 students who have followed my online courses, helping them to get the score they need in IELTS speaking. So if you like, keep on listening. And in this video, I'll share with you first some tips about mindset, then tips in part 1, part 2 and part 3. And at the end, I'll tell you my philosophy about learning English and how it can help you. Right, sound good? Let's get going. Okay, let's begin with 4 mindset tips, right? About the way you're thinking. The first one is enjoy the test. Yeah, crazy, I know. But if you're thinking, I'm going to enjoy the test, you're going to relax more. One of the biggest challenges for students is that they get nervous at the start of the test. And I have seen many students who are a band 7 get a band 6 because of nerves, right? Just change the way you're thinking from, oh my God, I don't want to do this, to I'm going to enjoy this. Whatever happens, I'm going to enjoy it. And that sense of peace, relaxing and calmfulness will really help you. Tip number 2, smile. And here, I mean, just before you go into the test, smile to yourself, right? Almost an inward smile. Again, it will help you relax. It'll give you a sense of calmness and confidence. And also when you walk into the room, that air of a gentle smile will have a positive impact on the examiner, right? Not a fake smile. Hello. No, not like that. Just a gentle smile to yourself throughout, well, at the beginning and throughout the test. Tip number 3 on mindset is, well, keep it simple, especially at the start of the test. In the first minute or 2, the first few questions, keep it super simple. Don't try to show off complex language or funny, unusual phrases. Just keep it simple. It's your time to get used to the room, to get used to the examiner and the examiner's voice, and just to build, well, to warm up, right? You don't start a marathon with a sprint. Start a marathon slowly. And believe me, your IELTS speaking test is a marathon. Okay, tip number 4, be natural. Many students, when they start speaking in a test, they go into kind of robotic mode. Hello, yes, my name is Keith. I live in Spain and I have been here for 5 years. Thank you. And it's just not natural, right? Try and imagine you're speaking to a colleague or a friend and just answer in a very natural way, especially at the beginning of the test. Yeah. That's it. 4 simple tips about mindset. Let's move into part 1. And here I'm going to focus a lot on the kind of language you need to do well in IELTS speaking part 1. 5 tips for part 1. Let's do it. So I'm going to illustrate each tip with 1 model answer and a total of 5 model answers. And in fact, if you go back later and watch the whole video, you'll see that each tip is applied in each model answer. Ha! Clever, hey? Let's have a look first of all. Tip number 1. Use some connectors, maybe 1 or 2, to improve your fluency. Now, if you know the band descriptors, you will know that fluency includes things like hesitation, but also coherence. That's the logical flow of your ideas. And that logical flow is helped by connectors. Things like and, also, but, in the first place, right? So here are some very, very common connectors we use particularly in speaking natural English, right? If I want to give an idea or an opinion, I can say, in my opinion, in my view, to my mind, I would say, as far as I'm concerned, right, some nice natural connectors. If you want to add to an idea, if you want to add ideas, we often say, on top of that, also. What's more, I'd also add that, okay, and of course, if you want to contrast ideas, you can say but. You could say, however. That said, mind you, at the same time, whilst that's true, I also think, right? So these are natural spoken connectors, and it's really important to organize your answer and to improve your fluency. So let's see in a model answer for the question, what's the question? For the question, do you think it's important for friends to laugh together? And you're going, to laugh? What's that? Sorry, to laugh. The Queen says to laugh. But because I'm from Manchester, we say to laugh. So the question is from me, and this is important because just in case your examiner is from Manchester, listen for the flat ah. Do you think it's important for friends to laugh together? To my mind, it's extremely important because it helps us to chill out. I haven't been going out much lately with my friends, the lockdown, but when we do go out together, we love to crack a few jokes together. On top of that, I just think laughing is a great way to stay healthy and positive. So did you see there? We had, to my mind, but on top of that, different connectors that really added value and quality to my answer. And tip number 2 is to use some complex grammar. Okay, now to get a band 7, you need to be using some complex structures. Complex grammar is really divided into 2 areas. There is the clauses, so a mixture of subordinate, dependent or non-dependent clauses, relative clauses, and then there's the tenses. Okay, let's look here just at the tenses. So we have simple tenses. So when you use the present simple, there's the clue. The simple past, another clue. The future, these are all quite simple tenses. But we could be using more complex ones like present perfect continuous, conditionals. And these show off a wider range of grammar, especially when we use them accurately. So I think in part 1, talking about yourself, one of the easiest tenses to use effectively is the present perfect continuous. I have been doing something, right? I have been living in Spain for 2 years. So this is where we talk about something that started in the past and has been continuing until now. It's often used to emphasize recent activities in progress also. So here, instead of saying, you know, where do you live? Well, I live in Spain. Okay, simple, right? But you could just change it a little bit and say, where do you live? I live in Spain. I've been living here for 2 years now, right? Present, perfect continuous. It gives a real simple, no, complex added edge to your answer. And you can use this all over the place. Check out all of the answers today and you might just notice it. Okay, so let's take a very specific example here. For the question, do you think history is important? Yes and no. On the one hand, it's important because it shapes our identity. But on the other hand, I've been reading a few history books recently, and it strikes me that history always repeats itself. It seems like we never learn. There, so can you see it? I've been reading a couple of history books lately. Very simple, very effective. Let's move on. Number 3 is use idiomatic expressions. To get a band 6 and especially a band 7, for a band 7 you must be using less common and idiomatic vocabulary. Idiomatic expressions are not only idioms, right? Don't forget phrasal verbs. Some phrasal verbs, in fact a lot of them, are idiomatic. So that means that the meaning of the whole phrase is different from the individual words. So when I say I was chilling out with my friends, it doesn't mean I was cold, right? It just means I was relaxing. Chill out, to relax. It's idiomatic. So a lot of phrasal verbs are idiomatic. So how many do you need to use? Well, you're not going to use them in every answer. And if you use too many, it will sound unnatural. But you can sprinkle 1 or 2, I guess 1 or 2 in all of part 1 would be very, very nice. Again, it's not mathematics. You just get a feeling for it, but not too many. But somewhere in the test, you do want the examiner to go, ooh, wow, 2 or 3 times where they hear either a nice idiom or idiomatic expression, impressing the examiner. So let's take an example here. Indeed it does. As a matter of fact, recently I've been visiting some of the mountains near my hometown and they are second to none. I mean, they pull in a huge number of tourists. And you can see why. I mean, because the views are outstanding. So here I did sprinkle in actually 2. There was second to none, which means the very best, right? This mountain is second to none as a tourist attraction. This book is second to none. It's the very best. And then the phrasal verb pull in. To pull in tourists is to attract tourists. So I use 2. Again, it's not mathematics. You could use 1, none, 2, but just not too many. Let's move on. Tip number 4 is waiting for us. Let's get over there. Tip number 4 is to make use of synonyms and antonyms. As I'm sure you know, a synonym is a word with a similar meaning, like big and large, right? Antonym is a word with the opposite meaning, like big and small. Now it's really important because it says here, band 7, you have a wide enough vocabulary to discuss a variety of topics flexibly. So you need to be building your vocabulary all the time, right? It's an ongoing process, it takes time, but there are things you can be doing to do it systematically. So always be making notes of vocabulary. Look at word families, right? The noun, verbs and adjectives of a different word. Look at prefixes and suffixes. They can really help you. Look at synonyms and antonyms. Look at learning vocabulary by theme or topic. Look at collocations. All of these are ways to build your vocabulary. And I think one of the quickest and easiest ways is synonyms and antonyms. Let's have a look. In IELTS speaking, right, we often say, I like this, I like music, I like painting. And here's the examiner. But we could spice it up a little bit and use different expressions. I'm fond of, I'm really into, right? I'm fond of reading, I'm really into reading. I'm one for reading history books. And then the examiner's like, ooh, nice. So synonyms help. Another example, right? We often say, oh, it's really good. The film was really good. The dinner with my family was really good. And there's the examiner. Okay, right. We could spice it up again, right? The dinner was out of this world. The dinner was a cut above the rest. The dinner was outstanding. And now your examiner is, ooh. Mental note, possibly band 7. So you're opening up the doors for your band 7. Synonyms, really important. Let's see one in a model answer. Do you like to go to the zoo? To tell you the truth, I'm not really into zoos. Actually, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I get that zoos can be educational, right? But I don't think it's fair to keep the animals cooped up in small cages all day. They should be out in the wild, I'd say. Right. Nice. So did you see there? I'm not really into, right? A bit different, a bit nice. I get, right? I understand that zoos can be educational. I get that zoos can be educational. So it's not necessarily fancy, difficult vocabulary, but synonyms, and they're so powerful, showing flexibility. Excellent. I can see tip number 5 just coming in right now. Here it comes. Let's go and find out what it's got to say. Tip number 5 is to add adverbs. Add adverbs. Right. Adverbs like slowly, quickly, completely, absolutely. Normally they have a ly on the end, and they describe adjectives or verbs and how we do things. Now, adverbs are seriously underused by students, but they're really important, right? Native speakers use them an awful lot, as you can just see. It helps you sound more natural, helps you be more flexible and show off your vocabulary. And they're so easy, right? I'm sure you know these adverbs, but you may not be using them. So in order to say really, we can say absolutely, totally, completely, extremely. In order to say quite, that film was quite interesting, right? It was somewhat interesting. It was fairly interesting. It was rather interesting, right? And to say not often, rarely, I hardly ever do that. I do that once in a blue moon. One of my favourites. Remember or notice, if it's a long adverb, an adverbial clause like once in a blue moon, it goes at the end, right? I do it once in a blue moon. Okay, so let's see it in action. Have you ever been to an art gallery? To be honest, I've been visiting quite a few art galleries recently because my wife is a bit of an art buff. We went to a modern art exhibition last week and I was completely bowled over by the paintings. They were totally out of this world. Did you see that? Completely, totally, nice adverbs. Give it a touch of naturalness. Excellent, good. So we have looked at 5 different tips. If you now go back and listen to each model answer, see if you can spot every single tip in each answer. a few of these tips have talked about vocabulary, right? Learning vocabulary takes a long time. It takes patience and persistence. It's something you need to dedicate time to, but believe me, it's worth it. It's well worth doing. So now you've got lots of great language for part 1. Let's move on into part 2. And in part 2, I'll be looking at some tips, well, how to handle the 1-minute preparation, as well as language and techniques, which will really help you manage part 2. Okay, let's do it. So tip number 1, plan a clear structure. Now, you may know, or maybe you don't, in IELTS Speaking Part 2, suddenly the examiner will give you a task card, a piece of paper, and a pen or a pencil. And you have 1 minute to prepare. It's really important in that minute to get an idea. Get an idea quickly, one idea that is good enough. Don't spend the whole minute thinking of different ideas, one idea, and then use that minute to prepare your structure. Of course, you have the bullet points that can guide you, but what you want to write down is what you're going to talk about. So, for example, if the question is describe a person you think is intelligent, right? I may write down something like this. I'm going to talk about my father and about, well, what he does, but he's retired. I can talk about the job he had. I'll say that he's intelligent because of the advice he gives me, and also he plays chess. And this will stop you getting lost. Where am I? What was I talking about? What was the question? The structure. So important. Don't write a lot. You haven't got enough time. Just some keywords. Structure, so important. And do remember, when you're speaking, you keep this and the task card, you keep it in front of you. You use it. A bit like politicians giving a speech. You use it to guide you. So, for example, it might look something like this. Well, I'm going to tell you about my father. He's retired at the moment, but he used to be a da-da-da-da-da-da. I think he's intelligent because, he gives very good advice. I remember one time he da-da-da-da-da-da. And also, what's more, we play chess and he's a very good chess player. He usually beats me, blah, 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 blah. And that's the person I want to describe. This is your roadmap. This is your structure. Make sure you have one. Don't get lost. Tip number 2 is be direct at the start. So remember, in part 2, you can talk for 1 to 2 minutes. I recommend you talk at least 1.5 minutes. Now, you might not know how long that is, although if you have been practicing at home, you should have a good feeling, right? If you're not sure, keep talking until the examiner stops you. So be direct. Some students, I think, make the mistake of giving a kind of an introductory lecture or talk about the topic. Like intelligence, describe an intelligent person. Well, intelligence is an important aspect of human nature. There are different kinds of intelligence, emotional intelligence, and no, stop. Talk about the person or tell the examiner directly who you're going to talk about. For example, the person I'm going to describe is my father. Boom, bam. Otherwise, any kind of preamble or talk or lecture is going to confuse the examiner and will not help you. You can use a nice little idiom here. You can say, the person I'm going to describe is none other than my father. None other than. Difficult, right? Can you say that? None other than. None other than my father. When we're talking about something or a person that may be a surprise to the listener, you can say, well, it's none other than my father. The person I'm going to talk about is none other than my mother, right? If you're going to talk about a place, right, your favorite place, just say, I'm going to tell you about my favorite place. It is, boom, direct. So be direct at the start. Don't ramble, don't digress, don't go around all the houses, get to the point. Tip number 3 is to use different tenses. Sometimes students ask me, Keith, in IELTS Speaking Part 2, which tense should I use? There's no answer. You can use any tense depending on the meaning you want to give. What's important, I think, is in IELTS, you need to show off a wide range of grammatical structure, including different tenses. So Part 2 is a great opportunity to do that. Very often, there are opportunities to talk about things in the past, things in the present, and things in the future, if it feels comfortable. I want to show you now, in this video, one technique. It's a special storytelling technique to describe events or activities. It's as old as the hills, but it's really powerful. And it's about using the present tenses to describe a story in the past. Sounds strange, right? But let's see an example, okay? Let's imagine we've been asked to describe an event. And I begin like this. It happened about 2 months ago. I was waiting for a friend inside a coffee bar. This woman came in and started talking really loudly on her phone. Then she sat next to me. It was so noisy, I asked her to be quiet. Now, if you look at the structure, we've got the time it happened is usually the simple past. It happened 2 months ago. When we set the scene, we usually use the past continuous. I was waiting for a friend. I was sitting in a bar, setting the scene. And then there's a series of actions which are often in the simple past. She came in, she started talking, she sat next to me, different actions. That's great. Already you've got some different tenses there. But look what happens if we change and introduce the present tense. Have a look at this. It happened about 2 months ago. I was waiting for a friend inside a coffee bar. Then this woman comes in and starts talking really loudly on her phone. And then she sits next to me. Oh, it was so noisy, I asked her to be quiet. Now, can you see what's happening? We've got the time is the same, the setting of the scene is the same, but then I switch to this woman comes in and starts talking, the present simple. What this does is it makes the action really vivid and alive, almost as if you can see the woman here in the conversation, right? It brings it to life. It's a really powerful technique. And then very often when we're concluding, talking about the final actions, you go back to the past, right? It was noisy. I asked her to be quiet. It's a very powerful storytelling technique. It's quite tricky, so you need to practice it a lot. And there are no rules about when you switch tense. It's just the feeling you want to create. But try it out, practice it. And now that I've told you, I think as you start listening to stories, you'll probably start noticing the use of the present tenses to describe past events. Very powerful, very useful. Give it a go. Practice, but only use it if you feel confident. Okay? Great. Let's move on. Tip number 4, use some flexible templates. I'm a big fan of templates, right? A template is really a set phrase, but where you change one or two of the words each time you use it. I think templates are great because they can build your confidence. They can give you flexibility. And in a way, they're better than set phrases or idioms because those are fixed and you memorize them. The template, you're changing it each time you use it, but it's so powerful. For example, right, IELTS Speaking Part 2. I'd like to kick off by telling you, That's the template. I'd like to kick off by telling you what happened. I'd like to kick off by telling you the agenda for today's meeting. I'd like to kick off by telling you what I think about this piece of work. It's such a great template, very flexible when you're starting anything, especially IELTS Speaking Part 2. Another one describing an event, right? This took place Da, 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 da. This took place quite a while back. This took place 2 months ago. This took place last year, actually. Great. Another one, if we're describing a place, it's one of the places I have visited. It's one of the most amazing places I've visited. It's one of the most beautiful places I've visited. Actually, it's one of the cheapest places I've visited. Can you see? These nice templates are giving you lots of language and flexibility, helping you show off your grammatical range as well. Tip number 5, use cohesive devices. Cohesive devices are these words or little phrases that connect your sentences and your ideas. It's like the glue that holds your ideas and your speech together. Sometimes they're called discourse markers, linkers, connectors, right? And without them, then your speech and sentences just are disconnected. There's no logic. It's hard to follow. They're really important. Some of the basic ones are, first of all, to kick off when you're beginning, right? When you're going in sequence, after that, next, when you're changing topic, anyway, when you're concluding, finally, in the end, right? And all of these are so important because they make it easy for the examiner to follow you, and so you will get a higher score. It's one of the main criteria for fluency in the IELTS band descriptors, so it's really important. Here are some more examples. In the middle of a story, changing direction. Anyway, what happened next was... Nice. When you're coming to the end, often in IELTS Part 2, we have to talk about our feelings, right? You may say, and when it comes to my feelings, I'd say I felt really happy about it. When it comes to my feelings, I'd say... Or you could say, as far as my feelings are concerned, I'd say I was over the moon. Say it with me. As far as my feelings are concerned, there's a kind of a linking. As far as my feelings are concerned, I was over the moon. Or I'd say I was over the moon. Different possibilities, right? These are great cohesive devices you can be using to give cohesion to your answers and really impress the IELTS examiner. Remember, you can practice these in the ELSA mobile app speaking challenge. Let's move on to tip number 6. The final tip, and maybe the best, is tip number 6, get into the flow. So I think all of the above tips are really good, in my humble opinion. And this one is also really important. So sometimes when students are in IELTS speaking part 2, they kind of forget the grammar and all the tips and what they should be doing, and they just start talking and it just flows, and you can see them get into a flow and they just come out with this lovely, natural spoken English, lovely descriptions, lovely storytelling, and it just works. And it's great because remember, IELTS speaking is a test of your natural spoken English, not academic English. So getting into the flow sometimes and allowing this creativity and language to come out naturally is really great. Of course, it depends on your personality and possibly on your level and how much you've prepared. But if you've done lots of preparation and you've got the confidence, it can be really great to just get into the flow. And I think, creativity is really important because creativity is your uniqueness, right? When you speak, every sentence you create is unique. It's your creativity coming out. You know, if you're going to migrate abroad and live in a new community and country, that community doesn't want a robot. They need your creativity. They need to listen to you creatively expressing your ideas in English. Same if you go to study abroad at university. They don't need another robot to come into the class. They want to hear somebody using English creatively. They need your creativity. It's about what you can give them. It's your responsibility to be creative and to speak the best that you can. So I think it's really important. If you're going for an IELTS band 7, 8 or 9, then don't be too straight, too narrow-minded. Don't just imitate lots of phrases. Open up, be creative, get into the flow, let yourself shine, and you'll get the score that you need. Hey, you're still here. Great. Actually, between you and me, I'm not surprised, because I think you're the kind of student who is patient and persistent and keeps going. And that's why you're going to be successful. So great. Nice job. Keep at it. So listen, you may be thinking, if you're enjoying these tips, that actually also what I want is more materials. I'd like the vocabulary for all the different topics, even model answers and ideas so that I can be really prepared for the IELTS speaking test. Well, you can get all of that and more in my online course, IELTS Speaking Success. Get a Band 7 Plus Gold. There's a click on the link in the description below. You can find out more. Right now, let's move on to part 3. In part 3, we look not only at the language and the techniques, but also how to prepare for part 3, right? To make sure that you can say something on every single topic, whatever it may be. Let's find out. Let's do it. Part 3. So there you are. You've just finished IELTS Speaking Part 2 and it went quite well. But then the examiner begins Part 3 and asks you a question you have no idea about. And you freeze like a bunny in the headlights. Do you know what a bunny is? A bunny is a rabbit, right? The bunny in the headlights from the car. You've frozen, right? Your mind has gone blank. Nice expression. Bum. Your mind has gone blank. What should you do? Let's have a look. Tip number 1. Well, quite simply, right? Ask the examiner to repeat the question. This will make sure that you can, or help you to understand the question, or at least give you some time to think a bit, right? So you could say, could you say that again? Could you repeat the question? Or even if you actually didn't understand the question, then just say, can you explain what you mean? That's nice. Can you explain what you mean? Because you're asking the examiner to rephrase the question, but you're not saying, I don't understand, right? You're just saying, the question's not very clear. Could you explain what you mean? Beautiful question. Help you to understand the question. That's the first thing. I think in addition, in this situation, I would use pause and some kind of a filler or a signpost to help me. Pause is different from hesitation, right? Hesitation is when you're, yeah, That's not good. Pause is, well, I think, can you see the difference? The first one is terrible. The second one, the pause, is really good. You're controlling the space and the time, actually thinking about it. Of course, native speakers need time to think. We don't just have ideas in our heads, and you don't in your language. So it's fine to take ideas, to take time to think of ideas. Just pause, right? For example, how has globalization affected the food industry? Well, globalization affected the food industry. I think it has affected the food industry in a number of ways. First of all, I think right? So notice I almost repeat the question to give me time to think about it. I pause. I use a signpost or a filler, right? A signpost maybe, what did I say? First of all, for starters, in the first place, you may use a filler. Well now, let me see. That's a good question. I haven't thought about that. Just a minute. Okay, so pause, filler, nice, and maybe repeat the question. All of these are very natural ways of speaking which you should be using, especially in part 3 of the test. If you want to learn more about different fillers and connectors, signposts that you can use, check out up here one of my other videos focused just on that. Let's move on to tip number 2. So recently when I asked students which part of part 3 they found difficult, what was difficult about part 3, one of the most common answers and most common problems was, I can't generate ideas quickly. Right. Now, that may happen for 2 reasons. Either you haven't got any ideas, full stop, right? Or you have some ideas, but you just can't get them out from your brain, out into the world, so to speak. Now, in the first case, you haven't got any ideas. Actually, that's quite good because that's easier to solve. All you need to do is go out and steal some ideas. Go on the internet, get on the web, go and find 2 or 3 reliable sources. Look for the topics that you know might come up, right? And start researching, getting the language, getting the ideas. I would suggest some reliable resources just to, that have good English, for example. You may want to look at the BBC, BBC News site or the BBC Learning English site. The Conversation, great website, full of debates, current affairs, nice. TED Ed, which is the education branch of TED Talks. Some great videos, wide range of topics. They have transcripts, so you can also read as well as listen to spoken English. And that's the great thing about it. It's all spoken English. Wikipedia. Now, I know it's not 100% reliable, but it is, in a way, peer-reviewed. I mean, it is quite reliable, but it puts things in very simple English, easy to follow, and you can flick from one idea to another quite easily. So that's it. Go and find some ideas. Do your research as part of your study. In the second case, where you actually do have some ideas, but you can't get them out into the world, then you need to practice thinking on your feet. That's a lovely expression, to think on your feet. What does that mean? Well, it just means to think quickly, right? So you need to practice thinking quickly. And a really good way of doing that is to use the recorded IELTS mock tests. Now, I've done a bunch of these on my website. Here's an example, right? Have a look at this. You go to this web page, you can see it's a recording of me asking the questions, and there is time for you to answer.
Hello, welcome to the IELTS speaking test. My name is Keith. Can you tell me your full name, please? Right, and what can I call you? Okay, great.
And then I come and ask you the next question. So it's like you're in the exam. You've got the time limit, the time pressure. You have to think quickly. It's really good practice. There's a lot of these on the website, Some of the links, again, below, you can go and check them out. So I guess the key thing in all of these different methods is that you are practicing against the clock, right? And that's putting pressure on you and pushes you to think quickly and to get your ideas out. Let's move on to tip number 3. So when I asked students again about difficulties in part 3, quite a lot of people said, listen, I'm nervous, I'm an introvert, I'm shy, I'm afraid of making mistakes. Right, so what can we do about you lot? Well, listen, first of all, join the club. I am a huge introvert, really, but I can handle it. And actually, I'm not afraid of making mistakes. I think I used to be, but I've learned that it's actually only by making mistakes that you learn to grow and get better. Now, of course, in the test, you want to make as few mistakes as possible. Absolutely. Let's talk first about mindset then, if you're nervous. So your mindset in IELTS is so important because so many people do badly because their nerves control them, right? So I really, really think it's important to enjoy the test, right? Smile before the test, during the test, and at the end of the test. All the way home, keep smiling. Your feeling of enjoying the test will change all the dynamics in the test room and will help you so much. We learn and perform better when we are relaxed, right? A bit of pressure does help, but too much will crush us, right? So change your mindset. Think about enjoying the test. You know, a while back, I had an experience. I had to go somewhere I didn't want to go, right? Let's imagine it's the dentist, something like that. Somewhere that you're dreading, you're really afraid, and you don't want to go there. And I didn't want to go to this place. But on the way there, I was so nervous, I thought, what if I chose to go there? What if instead of not wanting to go, I thought, I want to go? In fact, if I had other things to do today, I would still want to go here. I'm choosing to go here. And it was amazing that suddenly taking a choice and saying, I'm choosing to do this because I want to do it, calmed me down. It was all in the mindset. It can help a lot. So think about that. Think about enjoying and choosing to go there. If you're into mystical stuff, it's basically accepting the now. That's what it really is about. But you need to practice it. It doesn't just happen. It's a skill you need to develop. Right, mistakes. So why do we make mistakes in English, right? In the test, one reason is, especially in part 3, students are thinking about the structure, right? You have teachers like myself who say, listen, you can have a good structure, give your opinion, say why, give an example. And so in the test, you're thinking, okay, opinion, say why, example, right? Keith told me, good, yeah. And you're thinking so much about the structure, it can cause you to make mistakes with your grammar or vocabulary, right? Now, structures are good, but sometimes it's good just to go with the flow. Just start speaking, see what comes out, and speak and just go with the flow. Let it happen, right? You're not evaluated on structure, you're evaluated on natural language. And very often, native speakers and non-native speakers just go with the flow. So if you feel that, that's really good, right? Feel that flow, it's really good in part 3. The other reason that a lot of students make mistakes, especially in part 3, is they're focusing on trying to use fancy Band 9 vocabulary, complex structures I have to use, right? And that's true, but there's always a balance between fluency and accuracy, right? The more you try and be accurate, then possibly your fluency comes down, right? Sorry, more accurate, less fluency. If you try and be more fluent, maybe your accuracy comes down, right? Maybe more mistakes. So you need to find the balance. My recommendation really is to speak at your level, right? If you're a band 6, speak at the band 6 level or just a little bit above. Push yourself a little bit. Don't try and speak like a band 8 or band 9 with fancy words that somebody has taught you which are super advanced, but you don't really understand. It's not going to work. You'll lose your balance and you'll make lots of mistakes on grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation. So try and speak at your level or just a bit above your level and get that balance of fluency and accuracy. Cool, right? Okay, now the other thing you can do, right, and this I guess is a tip, is to, when you're answering, start slowly and then speed up a little bit, right? Very often we're so nervous in part 3 questions, we just blah, 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 and we start speaking much, much too quickly. And it's often a good idea to start slowly and build up, right? So for example, have cities changed much in recent years? Have cities changed much? Well, that's a good question. I would say yes, in my country at least, they have changed quite a lot. For instance, nowadays there's a big influx of people coming from the countryside and they're all working in the city because there's a lot more jobs there. And so that causes, more opportunities, but it causes problems as well. Right? So you can start slowly and then begin to speed up as you're feeling the flow and you're getting into the flow and so on and so forth. Great. So these are some ideas about handling your fear of mistakes, but also your nerves as well. A final thing to mention, right, about mistakes is a common misunderstanding. And I think this comes from people reading model answers on websites that have been typed out. Most written model answers are written English, and actually we don't speak like that. But what students try to do is they try to speak like that, right? Actually, spoken English isn't like that. Okay, let me show you. Simple example, right? Here is a written model answer. My brother recommended this film. He thought it was hilarious and that it would suit my sense of humour. So I watched it on Apple TV. Now then, look what happens when we actually say this, right? And I'll put the script up so you can see what I'm saying. This film, well, my brother recommended it, right? He said, he thought it was hilarious and that it would suit me or my sense of humour. So I watched it on Apple TV. What's different? Well, we front the nouns a lot. We put the noun at the beginning of the sentence. We have restarts where we change our mind halfway through a sentence and change the structure. And we repeat a lot, right? We repeat things that we're saying, sometimes with a small change. This is natural English, right? These are not mistakes to worry about. It's the natural way we speak. Don't try and speak these perfect written sentences. It's not natural. And it's also very difficult to do unless you're a trained actor. Great. So lots of ideas there about mistakes and nerves. Let's move on to tip number 4. Now then, do any of the following comments sound familiar to you? Sometimes I can't explain my answers. The questions in part 3 seem strange. I have no knowledge on some of these topics. I don't know how to explain my idea. I lack vocabulary on certain topics. Sound familiar? Right? Having knowledge, ideas and vocabulary to explain a topic is a common difficulty. I talked earlier about researching. That's true. And let's talk about some other approaches here. So imagine the examiner asks you this question, right? Do you think the science of genetic engineering will be popular in the future? Are you asking me? or Dr. Johnson over here. Right, now you've got two choices, right? You could say, I don't know. I don't know much about that. Right? Or you could do something slightly different. You listen to how I answer it. Do you think the science of genetic do you think the science of genetic engineering will be popular in the future? To be honest, I'm not even sure I know what the science of genetic engineering is. I guess it's got something to do with medicine and it's related to the medical field. And so I suppose in that case, yes, it will be popular because obviously with COVID, research around medicine is very, very important for our future. But to be honest, I'm not really clued up on that topic. Okay, so what's the difference? The difference is in my answer, the second answer, I'm talking, right? Remember, the examiner's not evaluating your knowledge. They're evaluating your English. So even just talking about what you don't know is good, right? I don't know much about that. To be honest, I haven't thought about it. I'm not clued up on that topic. If it's this, then maybe that. And just keep talking, right? It's better to say something than nothing. So remember, the examiner evaluates your language, not your ideas. There is no right or wrong answer. So don't worry if it's the right answer. There isn't one. And say something. Keep it fairly short. You don't want to go all around the houses and get confused. But say something, keep it short. Great. Now, you can, in part 3, give some personal examples. So this sometimes makes it easier for students because they may not have a worldwide example for what they want. You can give 1 or 2 personal examples, but just make sure that not all your examples are about you, right? Part 3 is more about abstract ideas, but 1 or 2 are okay, right? For example, do you think the science of genetic engineering will be popular in the future? Oh, well, that's a good question. And to be honest, I don't know too much about it. But, my brother studied genetic engineering at university, and he thinks it's a really popular field. It's going to become all the rage in the future, which is the reason why he studied it. So it's not really my cup of tea, but he knows a lot about it. Right, great. Personal example. Again, just explaining I don't know much about it, but I'm still talking, so I'm still being evaluated, right? So you may get 1 or 2 difficult questions. These are strategies you can use now and again, right? So let's move on to tip number 5. I've been listening, and some of you have said, how to increase the length of my answers. How to use complex language and idioms in part 3. The vocabulary I use is too simple. Please suggest good vocabulary which can be used for any answer in part 3. Well, to be honest, I don't have a magic hat to produce magic vocabulary, but these are all very good questions, and I think they all point to the same thing, right? The vocabulary and the language you use is a reflection of your level. You can't really pretend to be at a higher level, right? If you're a house, or if you have a house, you can't pretend to be a skyscraper. If you're a house, you're a house. What you can do is build day by day, week by week, to make your house bigger and bigger like a skyscraper. And this is what I mean. I guess my tip here is really advice rather than a tip. It's to focus on building your language day by day, week by week for the long term. There's no trick. You can't fake it, really. You can try, but most of the times people don't succeed. The much more beneficial thing to do is to focus on building your vocabulary. And a great way to do that is to focus on topics. Hey, this is what we do in my live lessons. The first Thursday of every month, 10 o'clock Spain time, we pick a topic, we develop the language you need and practice it. Keep on doing that for weeks and weeks and weeks. Keep doing it and you will get better and better. As well as topics, do pay attention to subtopics. These are important because your topic will give you some language, but the subtopics will give you a much wider and richer variety of language and vocabulary. I strongly recommend you check out my website, right? Look at the part 3 section. I'll just show you briefly here, and you can see different topics and different subtopics for part 3. And you can use these to go on the internet, do a bit of research for the different topics. Just look in Google, right? It will give you lots of links. You can have a look around and do it. A big focus on topics and subtopics because your ability to develop topics and subtopics is part of your fluency mark. So it is important. So in part 3, we've looked at language, we've looked at mindset, topics, subtopics, and that long-term approach to learning English and preparing for IELTS, right? Exam technique is one thing, but when it comes to improving your speaking skills, well, somebody has to tell you, so it might as well be me. There's no magic. There's no secret formula, right? It takes time, patience, and persistence. And a lot of what I call fun work. Some people talk about hard work, right? Study hard, work hard, until it goes into my head. That kind of no pain, no gain thing. No. My philosophy is fun work. Yes, you have to study and practice over time, but it should be fun. Make it as fun as possible. The research tells us the less stress you have and the more fun you have, the deeper the learning. So logically, the better you will do in your IELTS speaking test. So that's it. I do hope all of these tips and ideas have been useful for you. Well done for sticking with me all the way to the end. You deserve a marathon gold medal. You'll get your gold medal when you do well in your test, I'm sure. And if you are doing the IELTS test soon, listen, the very best of luck. I hope it goes really, really well. Do let me know. And if you're interested in my online course, the Gold course, click on the link in the description below. Find out all about it. I'd love to see you there. In the meantime, keep studying, keep having fun, and listen, I'll see you in the next video.